PY17 that starts July 1. This is a follow-up to the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2. So we spoke about a month ago to introduce the MOU template and the budget spreadsheet that are being used right now for negotiations. And we said during that webinar that their new federal guidance had been issued that significantly affects the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2. And we also said during that webinar that the WIOA Interagency Work Group was seeking clarification from the federal government regarding concerns they had about the new guidance and the significant impact it would have on the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2, particularly because we just issued it and it incorporated the final rules. So this webinar is to confirm that the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2 remain the authoritative source and are still active. But the WIOA Interagency Work Group is providing the supplemental guidance to the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2. And the supplemental guidance is just confirming Illinois' approach to certain parts of the guidance as it waits federal clarification during the program year that starts July 1. So we're just going to talk about three things today. One, we'll provide a little background. Two, we'll go through 6 items of the supplemental guidance as well as 2 technical changes. And then we'll talk about any additional resources. And we will have to, we'll stop at certain points and open it up for questions. And you are welcome to type your questions in the bottom left-hand corner in the chat pod. That helps us keep track of the questions because, as many of you know, we address those questions in what we call an MOU FAQ, the frequently asked questions. We document those questions and provide responses, and then we distribute that and make it available on the WIOA implementation portal so we can all use it as a resource going forward. So it is actually helpful if you type your questions in the chat pod. That way we make sure that we don't lose them. And we'll also open up the phone lines at certain times so that you can ask your questions by phone for those of you who are not joined on webinar. So we'll start with the background. Many of you have already seen this, but we're just providing the 3 links to the Training and Employment Guidance Letters, or the TEGLs. So when we say the new federal guidance, we're referring to these 3 TEGLs. They were issued in January after we already issued the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2. And we just wanted you to have these links if that you need them to go look up the TEGLs. And there's also DOL put out an FAQ document of its own to describe the TEGLs as well. So that's available all by clicking these links. So the TEGLs issued have significant effects on the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2. Some are short-term effects, some are long-term effects. So this slide shows the 4 major changes introduced in the TEGLs, and I want to describe how they would affect the Governor's Guidelines, and then we'll talk about in a few slides about how we're actually approaching them. So the TEGL first states that states can opt to delay the effective date of infrastructure funding requirements by 6 months, so until January 1st, 2018. In Illinois, infrastructure costs and requirements are actually on track to being met by July 1, 2017. The TEGL on item 2 on the slide also says that the infrastructure funding mechanism now expands to include affiliate and specialized service centers. Well, in Illinois, you've all known that infrastructure costs were always defined as the non-personnel costs to operate the physical, comprehensive one-stop center. That did not apply to affiliate centers, which have different requirements and that are not the same as comprehensive one-stop centers. So that would be a major change. The TEGL also says, number 3, that a one-stop center certification requirements would expand to include affiliate sites. And again, in Illinois, one-stop certification requirements have only applied to comprehensive one-stop centers, not affiliates and specialized service centers. So that would be another big change. And lastly, the TEGL number 4 says that each partner's cost to provide career services are mandatory additional costs of local service delivery systems, and they are subject to local negotiations. So in previous webinars, you've heard us say that infrastructure costs cover the operating overhead costs of the physical comprehensive one-stop center. And then on the other hand, you have local service delivery system costs, which are less defined in the law, and they're more wide open, and they are subject to local negotiations about what constitutes a local system cost that will be shared. Now the TEGL comes out and says career services are mandatory for this local system cost that must be shared and reflected in the MOU budget. Well, that would be a major change because right now the budget template that is used right now for MOU negotiations and annual budget negotiations does not reflect career services as a program cost at all. So we're going to explain more about Illinois' approach in the supplemental guidance in a minute. There's just one more piece of background that we want to provide. The WIOA Interagency Work Group, which consists of the state-level partners that administer the programs under WIOA, it gets together and it is seeking clarification from the USDOL Region 5 regarding 3 areas, and these are considered 3 concerns that came from the new federal guidance in the TEGLs. 1, the WIOA Interagency Work Group is seeking clarification about infrastructure cost funding requirements. 2 is the affiliate and specialized centers and whether infrastructure costs and comprehensive certification requirements apply to affiliate centers. And 3rd is the career services budget, whether career services would be reflected in the annual budget. So until the WIOA Interagency Work Group gets a response or any clarification from the federal government, the continuing operating guidance is operate under the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2 until further notice. So that is still your guiding document. And this supplemental guidance will help you confirm Illinois' approach in the meantime. So in the meantime, the Interagency Work Group issued this supplemental guidance for program year 2017, which starts July 1. So that's the same as state fiscal year 2018, also starts July 1. So this supplemental guidance, the primary purpose, number 1, is to clarify the impact of the TEGLs for this coming program year only. So this supplemental guidance only applies to the program year and state fiscal year that starts July 1, 2017. The second purpose is to kind of flag some items in the Governor's Guidelines that could potentially change in the program year 2018 that starts July 1, 2018. So just to give you a heads up that this is how it is for this coming fiscal year and program year, but it could change in the following year depending on the federal guidance. So that's just to keep you alert. So now we'll go through the 6 areas of the guidance that are encompassed in the supplemental guidance. The first regards the effective date of infrastructure funding requirements in Illinois. The supplemental guidance confirms that Illinois is choosing to continue to use July 1, 2017 as the effective date. In other words, Illinois is not opting to delay the implementation of infrastructure funding requirements. The justification for that is that the 6-month extension in the TEGL only applied to the infrastructure funding requirements. It did not apply to the MOU negotiations and the local system cost negotiations. Those were still going to have to be effective July 1, 2017 anyway. And the thinking of the interagency work group is that delaying the infrastructure requirements by 6 months would complicate the MOU negotiations and the negotiations about the local system costs. So the bottom line is that Illinois really does not have a compelling reason right now to delay the effective date of infrastructure costs, and that therefore the July 1, 2017 effective date stands. The second item of guidance in the supplemental guidance is that infrastructure funding requirements apply only to comprehensive one-stop centers for the program year. So while the TEGL said infrastructure funding would extend to affect affiliates, Illinois for this coming program year is continuing with what's in the existing Governor's Guidelines Revision 2. It's not changing in Illinois right now. Infrastructure funding requirements are still only applicable to comprehensive one-stop centers, not affiliates. The justification for that is that expanding the infrastructure funding to affiliate centers would require a major policy change in the definition, the designation, and the standards that are applied to affiliates in Illinois. So that will, the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, the IWIB, is looking at that and considering assessing a statewide policy, but in the meantime, the guidance is to just continue what you've been doing, that infrastructure costs only apply to comprehensive one-stop centers. And we wanted to point out that there are not just policy implications about what affiliate sites mean and the requirements that apply to them. There would be a major financial implication if this expansion of the infrastructure costs did apply to affiliate centers. In Illinois, there are more than 70 affiliates throughout the state, and that's excluding the delegate agencies in WIOA in Cook County. So if required partners had to, in addition to paying the infrastructure costs of the comprehensive one-stop centers in each local area, and they also had to pay for the infrastructure cost of the 70-plus affiliate sites in the center, that would have significant financial implications for each required partner. But I should have noted that all that could change for the program year starting July 1, 2018. So the infrastructure funding requirements could expand to affiliate sites in July 1, 2018. That's just something to be aware of. Okay. So the third item in the supplemental guidance for this coming program year is that the allocation methodology in Illinois for sharing infrastructure costs and local service delivery system costs remains FTEs. So the justification for that is that the local partners and the required partners still have local flexibility to use alternative methods for allocating the costs of infrastructure and shared system costs, as long as they comply with the uniform administrative requirements in the Omni Circular. So the TEGL that was issued describes many different kinds of ways that you can allocate costs. And one of the pages 13 of the TEGL actually says that partners can use several different kinds of methodologies for different kinds of costs in the one-stop area. But in Illinois, the bottom line is that the preference remains FTEs under the local funding mechanism. If the state funding mechanism were to kick in, and because there is an impasse, then FTEs is the required methodology. So Governor's Guidelines Revision 2 do not change in that respect. I've been talking a lot, so I thought I would pause here before we continue with the three remaining items of guidance. We welcome any questions you have about what we've talked about so far. We see someone typing in the chat pod, so we'll give them a minute. So the question is, if there is a policy change regarding the affiliate sites, would the change be delayed until PY18, or is there a possibility that would it take effect during PY17? Currently, the thinking right now is that the policy would be developed during PY17 and effective PY18, July 1, 2018. Of course, that could change if the federal government comes out and says, no, you have to change this right now. Obviously, we would comply with that. But the thinking right now is that there would be no major policy change for this coming program year. It would take effect the program year 2018. We see some more typing going on in the chat pod, so I'll give them a minute.
Yeah. To follow up for Pam on Bethany's response, if something came out midstream, I'm sure we would ask DOL if we could delay implementation until the start of the next year so that folks don't have to, do stuff midstream. But again, that depends on how much latitude DOL is willing to give us and when they come out with guidance.
Yeah, and the WIOA Interagency Work Group obviously would just get together once we get any kind of response to the letter that was issued to DOL Region 5 in February. And the first thing we'll do is talk about, okay, now how do we deal with this? So, and obviously we would communicate anything as soon as possible about if policy were changing immediately. Okay, any other questions before we move on to the next three items of guidance? Okay, we see a couple of people typing, so that's why we're pausing just a minute. We'll see if their question comes through. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item, number 4 in the supplemental guidance. This relates to career services. Remember, the TEGL says career services are now a mandatory additional cost that must be reflected in the MOU budget. But in Illinois, the guidance is remaining that while required partners will continue to pay for their own costs of providing career services in each comprehensive one-stop center, it is not going to be reflected in the annual budget for program year 2017 only. The justification is that the cost to provide the career services are borne by each required partner individually. They're not shared among required partners. So the WIOA Interagency Work Group will continue to study this requirement, and this is one of the primary points in the points of clarification sought in the letter sent to DOL in February. But again, the approach in Illinois is that each required partner has to cover its own costs of providing the career services, and right now it will not be reflected in the budget. This is another item that could potentially change in the program year 2018, depending on how the federal government responds. Okay, the next item of guidance is the cost sharing related specific to adult education providers and career and technical education colleges. One of the TEGLs, it says that if there are multiple partners in one LWIA, then they all have to contribute to the infrastructure costs of the comprehensive one-stop center. And what ICCB is saying is that it established that no adult education provider or post-secondary CTE community colleges, when they're located in the same area, has to provide services or funding in more than one comprehensive one-stop center. So this is specific to LWIA 7 in Cook County, that the providers who are located there, if there is no comprehensive one-stop center in their immediate service area, such as example is Mesa, then they would not have to pay into a comprehensive one-stop center that was outside of their area, and that really where they would receive no proportional benefit. I would like to open it up to LaVon Nelson of ICCB to offer some additional comments about this particular item of guidance.
Yeah, don't panic, anyone. We're not trying to get out of doing what we're supposed to do. So, I just want to say that up front. But you can look at page 6 and page 8 of 1716, TEGL 1716, where it indicates that all one-stop partners, whether they're required, blah, 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 are required to pay into the comprehensive. Same thing with partner programs with multiple grant recipients. At this point, this only is effective for LWIA 7, where they are going to count as of July 1st. Maywood and Northside comprehensive one-stops will no longer be, quote, comprehensive one-stops. Therefore, the partners, and it just doesn't include, we're only speaking for adult ed and post-secondary Perkins, but there are other local required partners also. The state, it's a different issue if you are handled through the state. But our local partners that are at the Northside and the Maywood have no comprehensive center anymore for which they would receive benefits or proportionate use and relative benefits received. For example, the adult ed and post-secondary Perkins out in Maywood are going to receive no relative benefit or proportionate use with Pilsen or Mid-South or Arlington Heights or Chicago Heights. So, and Chicago Cook, what brought this really about was that Chicago Cook Workforce Board is not going to include these particular partners, for example, Triton and Morton for Maywood, in their MOU negotiations. So there is also because there is no longer going to be a, quote, comprehensive. So they were no longer be included in the MOU, therefore there would be no way for them to in addition to the fact no relative benefit, there would be no way for them to even pay into a comprehensive. So they have agreed, however, the partners, at least adult ed and post-secondary Perkins, that are going to continue to provide their services in the in Maywood and Northside after July 1st. And they will continue, they may even enter into some informal financial arrangement with that particular site. Now, this ties back into the issue about what we do with affiliates, of course, that we've already talked about. If the language comes about that, we either this year or next year, PY17 or 18, have to do something with affiliates, then that all, of course, changes if, they remain a partner in the affiliate and partners are required to pay. Then it's a whole new ballgame. They know that. I've shared that with everybody. So at this point, we're not talking about those partners, for example, where there are 5 adult ed providers in an LWIA. There's a comprehensive one-stop. They're all still expected to come together and pay their infrastructure costs as a partner program with 5 providers coming together. Same for post-secondary Perkins. So we're not talking about examples like that. This is with a specific arrangements that are made. And so it only right now is applies to those 2 one-stops in LWIA 7. And so.
Thank you, Levon.
Sure.
We see additional questions on the chat pod, so I'd like to address those now. Rick asks, what constitutes an affiliate site? Is a site that is not staffed or financially supported by WIOA funds considered an affiliate site, for example, like a college? Rick, I will tell you right now that the definition of an affiliate site is varies by local area, and it's actually under study right now. A survey has gone out to every LWIA to ask how they are defining affiliate centers, who is located there, what programs are provided there, are they sharing costs. So we are starting to get the lay of the land of how local areas are treating their affiliate sites. And I'll also offer that an affiliate, a definition of an affiliate site is on the Illinois WorkNet glossary. So we would encourage you to go look at that if you want a specific definition of how the state has viewed it to date. But right now, it's all under study. And again, that survey results that we're going to get is going to inform the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board's policy work group for kind of exploring what policy will look like going forward.
I would add that if you have not responded to that survey, look for an email from Christy Jones, or have we resent it?
From Mike Baker.
That's what I sent?
Mike Baker sent it.
That's right, okay.
It's been a long week.
It has, okay. I can resend that to the field after this webinar. So if you did not get the survey, or if you got the survey and haven't responded yet, here's another final opportunity to take advantage of that.
Yep. So watch for the email from Mike Baker. Okay, and Tim Harmon asked a question, if partners have already reached agreement on their cost allocation, will they be required to reopen this once new guidance is finalized? Tim, honestly, it's really going to depend on what the federal guidance says. And Mike, would you like to offer anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would hope not.
Yeah.
That would certainly be part of the conversation we have with DOL, but at the end of the day, we'll have to do what they direct us to do.
Yeah. So, Tim, I'm sorry we don't have a clean answer right now, but it depends.
So break out your crystal ball.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the last item of guidance in the supplemental guidance, and it relates to our favorite topic of signatures. So the TEGL says that, let me just say, the way that Illinois is approaching signatures for this next program year is that all the required partners must still sign the MOU. At this time, there's no separate signature going to be required on the budget agreement, which is the TEGL has changed the language to say infrastructure funding agreement. So in Illinois, you have to sign the MOU, but no separate signature is required right now on the annual budget. And that is just for PY17. This could change for annual budgets that take effect July 1, 2018, because as you know, MOUs are negotiated every 3 years, or at least every 3 years. The budgets must be negotiated annually and agreed upon annually. So this is one area where the consultation with the federal workforce partners will determine whether a separate signature is required. But right now, Illinois is saying the signature on the MOU is sufficient to indicate their agreement with the budget because the budget is technically appended to the MOU. They're technically one document. So those were all the substantive guidance in the supplemental guidance. There's also two technical changes that don't change the content, but just add a little more clarification. The technical change, number one, anytime in the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2 where you see the word standard budget form or annual budget, you should read that to mean infrastructure funding agreement. Again, the TEGL started calling it this formal language of the infrastructure funding agreement, and we'll try to adopt that from now on. But just know in the Governor's Guidelines Revision 2 that when they are interchangeable at this time, and we'll start to apply infrastructure funding agreement from now on. The second technical change is just adding a footnote in a table that explains the state funding mechanism. And this is all related to when required partners in a local area cannot agree on how to share infrastructure costs, they reach an impasse, which is considered the worst case scenario. The state funding mechanism kicks in. But what the TEGL clarified and what we're affirming here in this technical change is that the state funding mechanism cannot be triggered by any partner that is not a required partner under WIOA. So there are additional partners that local areas can add. They're not required under the law, but they still offer services in the Comprehensive One-Stop Center or the local area. So if those non-required partners are the ones who don't agree to the infrastructure costs, they alone are not going to kick the whole entire local area into an impasse and require the state funding mechanism. So that the bottom line is that only required partners who don't agree would trigger the impasse and the state funding mechanism. And the last item, just to note, is that the supplemental guidance was considered effective the day it was distributed, which is Monday, March 6th, 2017. So it's in effect, and anytime major federal clarifications or guidance is received, then we'll obviously immediately look at that as an interagency work group and decide what additional revisions need to be made. And any major revisions would probably come out in the form of Governor's Guidelines Revision 3. So that's not yet. We're going to wait to do Revision 3 until we get the federal guidance about these items, and then we'll probably look at issuing a revised version after that happens. But until then, continue to use Governor's Guidelines Revision 2 and the supplemental guidance to guide your negotiations. So any other questions for the regarding the supplemental guidance or anything we've talked about today? We see some typing, so I'll give it a minute. Also, Scarlett did post in the bottom left of the chat pod the link to the WIOA glossary on Illinois WorkNet, and that's where you can look up the definition of the affiliate site. Thank you, Scarlett. Okay, someone stopped typing, so we'll go to the next slide. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry, there's a question from Steve Martin. What is the state funding mechanism? We have one partner with a minimum 0.25 FTE that will not agree to a budget or other area budgets. All partners are in agreement except this one. Are there other options? So this is a two-part question, and I'll answer it that way. One, the state funding mechanism is considered a last resort. When budget negotiations end in April, there's something called a remediation period that state-level partners are going to come in and try to help expedite a resolution to anything that is causing a disagreement with the local budget. And that's not yet at impasse. The remediation period is trying to avoid impasse. But once that 30-day remediation period ends, then the local area and the partners in that local area cannot agree, then unfortunately you are considered at impasse, which again is a worst case scenario. No one really wants this to happen because impasse requires the triggering of the state funding mechanism, which involves now, under the final rules, the governor coming in and determining what partners will pay in each local area for the local area that didn't agree. So rather than having the flexibility of deciding how you're going to share costs and what allocation methodology you're going to use, you lose all the flexibility. You have to do what the state, what the governor now tells you each required partner is going to pay as your fair share. So it also triggers some other things that go along with that, but that's probably the bottom line, is that you lose the flexibility and you have to accept what the governor says you're going to pay regardless of whether that's what you want to pay or not. And you also are likely to receive less funding under the state funding mechanism because of the way that it's established and the calculation that is required to do that. So again, no one wants that. The second item you said is that one partner does not want to contribute the 0.25 FTE. So the governor's guidelines in the FTE calculation spreadsheet identifies 0.25 is the minimum for a commitment that a required partner can make for the number of FTEs that it will use to provide services in the Comprehensive One-Step Center, either in person, through cross-trained staff, or through direct linkage technology. And the governor's guidelines all define that, so please feel free to look that up to know what those three things mean. But because 0.25 FTEs is the minimum, if a required partner is saying they're not going to commit that, if the local partners agree, okay, then the local partners are accepting that, but you have to accept that knowing that you will be out of compliance with the governor's guidelines. So it's a do at your own risk. If you're out of compliance with the governor's guidelines, then you open yourself up for some attention later on. And the guidance that we would say to that is that local partners do what you need to do to agree, but we would advise you to comply with the governor's guidelines at the same time. Mike, do you have anything else to offer about that? Okay. I think I'm going to admit that some of the questions might have scrolled, so I'm not seeing them right now. I'm going to go with the one that I see from LWIA 2. Would the state funding mechanism only apply to the partner that was not in agreement? Meaning the governor would say what the holdout would pay and everyone else would pay what they agreed to. That's not the case. That if a local area is at impasse and the state funding mechanism kicks in, then the governor sets what every partner will pay.
Bethany?
Yes, Levon.
Levon, may I jump in?
Yep.
I put a note in there, and I realized I had some typos in there, so I thought perhaps I should clarify. My understanding, this is for National ABLE that is subcontracting for CSEP programs. The National ABLE program that I've spoken to also that gets workforce contracts in the Chicago area is not having the same issue. And so to clarify, it's the National ABLE, unless, Steve, it's different for you, but it's the National ABLE, I believe, that is subcontracting CSEP. And as we talked earlier, I don't know, Bethany, if you want to go there, but we did talk about some of the partners that are having, quote, difficulty with the 0.25 and how we're looking at it.
Yes, Levon, I believe we addressed that. That they are...
No, but I mean that CSEP could be maybe doing the...
Yes. So the way, regarding the 0.25 FTEs, if you're not providing a... I'm sorry, Levon, I'm not sure how this differs from what I said.
On our stat call, we discussed, when the CSEP came up, we discussed how, they would need to justify, et cetera, like some of the other smaller, like Migrant Council,
yeah,
just like LWIA 2 put in there.
Right. So that was a little different than the FTE question.
That's true. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just offer that as food for thought for the rest of everyone else on the webinar, that there are two situations that are somewhat similar to the CSEP issue. So So if a program such as the National Farm Worker Jobs Program were to withdraw its services from a local area for its own reasons, then the guidance from the interagency work group is to document any federal guidance received regarding that, any guidance that the Illinois Migrant Council received from the federal government about offering its services or withdrawing its services from a local area, it should document. It should also document any justification for withdrawing the services so that there's a documentation of an internal reasons why Illinois Migrant Council would withdraw any its National Farm Worker Jobs Program from a local area. The same would be true for Second Chance program grant funding. Currently, Second Chance recidivism programs under Second Chance grant are applicable to 2 LWIAs in the state. There is a chance that Second Chance program funding will cease in September, and if that's the case, then the Second Chance would not be required to provide services in the local areas. Until that happens, the interagency work group's guidance to the Department of Corrections and to local partners is to document any federal guidance received. Sorry, let me say that again. The guidance is to the Department of Corrections to say, document any federal guidance you receive about your grant funding and withdrawing services in local areas, and also document your justification for not providing the services in the local areas. And the guidance to the local areas and the partners is to say, continue to invite the Department of Corrections to negotiations, and then know that they will do, when justification or federal guidance is available to them, they should be able to provide that to the local area to say, this is why we're not participating in your MOU negotiations right now. Again, that's only applicable to 2 LWIAs right now. If there is no Second Chance program in the LWIA, then they are not parties to the MOU and don't need to sign into the MOU. So those are the 2 items that have recently come up and that the interagency work group discussed in its last meeting, and that's the guidance at this time. Okay, we had another question from Steve Martin that says it seems odd that one agency, stop scrolling please, that one agency with a minimum requirement would put everyone else at risk. So there is language in the governor's guidelines, you have it? No. That if a, hold on one second, I'm going to flip to try to find it, so I'm going to, just give me 1 second please. Okay, Steve, there is something that we will provide to you in the FAQ, MOU FAQ. There is a provision in the governor's guidelines, and for some reason I just can't put my eyes on it at this time, that if there is only one partner that is disagreeing to the infrastructure costs and the MOU, then there is a carve-out that says that will prevent it from going to impasse, and that's the language I want to find, and I will provide to you in MOU FAQ. I apologize, I just can't quite put my finger on it at the second. So please know that it will be in the MOU FAQ that follows this webinar. Okay. There's another question about this. Do you have an updated spreadsheet? It has errors at the bottom. Yes, an updated budget spreadsheet has been posted to the WIOA implementation portal. Please use the WIOA implementation portal to download your, make sure that you have the most recent version of the spreadsheet. A new one has been recently issued that corrects a couple cells that were not open or calculating correctly.
on page 11.
Okay.
That's the bottom of page 10, item 18. It's where the governor's, the state funding
Yeah.
starts.
Okay, there's another question. Can you scroll up lower, Christine? Oh, there. The Illinois Migrant Council has informed us that they want to pay .08 after they had been told .25 is the minimum. I do not think that we should be at the mercy of the agencies that fail to comply. We understand, Steve, and again, the guidance at this time is to say that if local partners should negotiate with Illinois Migrant Council to see what can happen, but know that anything less than .25 would be out of compliance with the governor's guidelines. And then another says Illinois Migrant Council is not withdrawing services. They just can't afford to pay the .25 due to their funding level. If the local partners are in agreement, why should we be in non-compliant? So that's kind of the point that we're trying to make here, is that if local partners are agreeing to whatever all the partners are committing to pay, then you will, then that's the local decision. It's just that you'll be at risk of being out of compliance with the governor's guidelines. And we will continue to talk about this. This is probably not the only time we'll address this. And so your circumstances are noted, and we'll be sure to continue raising this with the interagency work group to determine the best way to proceed. So just know that you've been heard, and thank you for kind of keeping us informed of your situation. And also, I should mention that the Illinois Migrant Council is considering withdrawing council services in some areas. It's not been a definitive decision that we know of to date. So that's just one clarification if I misspoke earlier. So there's a question about, this is a really good question, and it doesn't have an exact answer, but the question is, what is the implication of not being in compliance with the governor's guidelines? There's two things that I'll respond to that, and anyone else is welcome to chime in, but one is for monitoring purposes, you could be open to the risk of you're not following the state guidance that is required for the governor to issue to local areas to guide their MOU negotiations and budget negotiations. So one, you're just kind of opening up yourself for risk during any kind of monitoring activity, state or federal level. The other is that the feds could come in and say, Illinois, you issued this policy and you're not even following your own policy. So that would also be a problem. So those are just the two things right now that I think you can consider the implications. I'm sure there are others that we'll have to talk about, and especially as we consider this .25 FTE implications, we'll just discuss that as the interagency work group and communicate any recommendations that come from that.
And just remember, there are other options that other partners may agree to help a partner provide that minimum .25 FTE through cross-training or direct linkage. So there are other options that ought to be part of the discussion.
We're encouraging, instead of us emailing out the updated budget spreadsheet, we encourage you to go to the WIOA implementation portal to download it. Scarlett put that link in the bottom left of the chat pod, so please go there if you haven't already. It's on the public page of the portal. You don't need a password to do that. Please download it from the site, and that's how you know you have the most recent version.
Sure, Mitchell's question within a deal.
LaVon, if you see Mitchell's question
Yeah,
in the
I
chat
see it.
pod, yeah, if you want to respond to that, you can. Otherwise, we can talk about it and put the response in an MOU FAQ.
Well, there is no TGOL that specifies that partners inside, if you're asking specifically, LWIA 7 who are not within a distance to receive benefit from a one-stop are not required to participate in the MOU. But it does say proportionate use and relative benefit. And so when they did away with 2 of the one-stop, comprehensive one-stops, they left partners without a comprehensive one-stop. They will not receive relative benefit or proportionate use for going into other areas. And so we have determined for adult ed and post-secondary Perkins, because Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership what initiated that, they are not including them in the MOU at all. So those partners will not even be in the MOU because they are not attached to a comprehensive one-stop. So, you know, if we need to come up with other language, I mean, if you need more clarification on that, Mitchell, or you can, you know, if I'm not understanding something, you know, call me and then I'll put it in a question for the FAQ, an answer to the FAQ. I don't know if that helped.
Okay, we see some additional typing going on, so we'll give that another minute, and then we'll talk about the last additional resources that are available to you. Okay, we're ready for next slide. The additional resources, if you've been on a WIOA Wednesday webinar before, you probably heard us talking about state technical assistance teams. We're calling them STATs for short. If you have questions about the supplemental guidance during, or any questions during your MOU and budget negotiations or your regional and local planning activities, then we encourage you to use the STATs as a resource. And specifically, if you have questions, you can contact, there's one leader, there's a STAT leader for every region. So all 10 regions have their own STAT leader. And the list of STAT leaders by economic development region is listed on the WIOA implementation portal on the public link that it just shows, you look for the STAT link and it'll pull up the current leaders. And that's who you would contact if you have questions. The email address is provided. And we'll just note that these STATs were formed by the WIOA Interagency Work Group, and they're intended to serve as liaisons between the local partners and the state level partners and the WIOA. It's really a way that the WIOA Interagency Work Group can stay on top of what trouble or what issues are coming up in negotiations before it's too late. We want to know if there's anything we can do to help before the MOU negotiations come to a close and an impasse is reached. So it's just a way for us to kind of keep alert of what is going on and know whether there's anything that state level partners can do to expedite an issue, a resolution. So the STAT teams are the liaison to the interagency work group, and they're not intended to micromanage. They're not intended to add a layer of bureaucracy. They are intended to be a resource, and they know that. They have checklists that guide them in conversations with you, with local partners about where you are in your negotiations. Again, that's just to inform the interagency work group of whether things are on track or whether there might need to be some technical assistance. That's really the primary purpose of that. So you can use your regular informal channels of communication as you typically do if you have questions, but your area, if your area experiences an issue that needs state level attention, then the STATs really are your go-to so that they can work with us and the interagency work group to address that. Okay, and Scarlett, thank you for putting up the link again to the STAT team leaders and their contact information. That's in the bottom left of the chat pod. We see another question from Mike. For Mike. Cross-training addresses services delivery, not the infrastructure costs. How could partners make up the other dollars to make the 0.25 FTE?
FTE applies to both, so
yeah.
What would affect the...
So there's two things going on here. One is the FTE commitments are made for providing services, any services in the local area. And that that commitment, whether 0.25 or 1 or 5 or whatever it is, that commitment then is the basis for allocating costs proportionately to all the partners based on the number of FTEs that are provided.
So if they're using less than 0.25 FTE, that affects both infrastructure and service delivery costs. So
Right.
the same FTE allocation impacts both areas. So yeah, it would help you on your infrastructure costs, but it would help on the service delivery side.
Lavon, do you see Amy's question, and do you want to respond to that here, or do you want to address that
I don't
offline?
see her question. I just see that she is aware and in agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
Thank
just
you.
said thanks.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, we've
Thanks
had
for-
many discussions back and forth with Chicago Cook to make sure we're clear on this and that this is specific to these situations, et cetera. And those partners are going to continue to provide services at the Maywood Workforce Center, whatever it's called, and our adult ed and post-secondary programs will continue to provide services at the Maywood and could enter, as I said earlier, into informal agreements, even some funds exchanging hands. But that would all be handled within the center, not in the MOU.
Yeah. And this is Mike. I want to clarify something. I misspoke on the FTE piece. Because the FTEs are allocated both to infrastructure and to service delivery, it would impact both. And I said that reversed initially. But so if another partner helps pick up part of that required FTE, then those costs are going to be distributed out on both sides of the spreadsheet, on the infrastructure side and also on the service delivery side.
Okay, I don't see any other questions at this time. The other resource for you as you go through your negotiations is on the WIOA implementation portal. There's a documents and updates page. It does not require a password. That's where you'll find the final rules. You'll find all the webinar recordings, so these are archived. Regional planning materials, they have their own section. Final rules of WIOA, you can link to those. Governor's Guidelines, Revision 2, and all the documents that go along with that. And the Comprehensive One-Stop Center materials and certification. So that is just a plethora of resources available on the WIOA implementation portal, and we encourage you to go on the site. If you need any assistance or if you need to set up an Illinois WorkNet account, please just contact Christy Jones so that she can work with Illinois WorkNet to get access for you. And Christy just added her email address there. You're welcome to email her if you are having trouble accessing the portal for some reason. Okay, any other questions? That is the end of today's webinar, and we appreciate all of the questions. We know that you are making progress in your negotiations, and we take that as a very good sign. We know that things come up, and you know the channels that you can contact us or the STAT member for assistance. And we'll just keep in touch, and any time that we receive guidance from the federal government regarding the issues in the supplemental guidance, we will certainly meet as an interagency work group and get new guidance out as soon as possible. So thank you all very much for your time, your questions, and good luck with the rest of your negotiation.